human rights, right? We said that liberty, freedom, and equality are our requisite preconditions for human rights. So, insofar as they're preconditions, we see that what we've done, what has been done in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is to incorporate those preconditions in articulating what human rights are. The next thing that we see is the discourse on rights. The notion of rights are evoked immediately in the first sentence of the first article. Why is that important? What that implies, though it's not stated, right? This idea of rights implies this idea, now I'm getting a little deep, but you know, if this is the first time you're watching me, you'll adapt to my style in a bit. For those of you who've been watching me for a while now, you're probably already in the groove. But this idea of rights implies an obligation. So in the first sentence, we see that the two of the three preconditions have already been discussed, and we see that rights has already been invoked. Insofar as rights has already been evoked, we see that this implies an obligation. Insofar as it implies an obligation, there's going to be a responsibility to respect those rights, right? That obligation, as we saw, corresponds to the rights. What we'll see is that there's going to have to be some teeth on this, and that those teeth will come from the codification of law, international law, and so on, right? So this obligation is reinforced, is legitimized, is given teeth by codified law. Okay, and I'm not going to go through, you know, this level of detail this is why I selected these, just because I think it's very good pedagogical, so that you really have a good understanding of, at least a general understanding of what it is that we're discussing here. Next sentence, they are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in a spirit of brotherhood. They're endowed, I can't put on my Nietzsche hat right now. For those of you who know what that means, I'm not going to address it to anybody else, but for those of you who have been watching the Nietzsche series, you know what's in my head. We can communicate without having to communicate. Alright, so the next part, the second half of Article 1 is, they are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in the spirit of brotherhood. Okay, not going to complicate that more than it needs to be. So that's Article 1. Next article, Article 3. And if, just as an aside, I'm not going to address it, but if you have been watching my Nietzsche series and you have an idea of what I might have been thinking in the second sentence of Article 1, they are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in the spirit of brotherhood, just write a comment below what you think I might be thinking, and we'll have a discourse off of the video. I don't want to do it on the video, because this is human rights and this is not Nietzsche. Alright, Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. So now we recognize Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of person. Okay, so finally we do get liberty, right? Again, I said three of the preconditions, and Weston introduces this as well. Three of the preconditions for an understanding of human rights: equality, liberty, and freedom. We talked about freedom and equality in the first article. In the third article, not to say that it's not in the second, but I just chose these. In the third article, we get liberty, right? So check, check, check. But we also get the idea of a right to life and security of persons, right? So that all of these concepts become necessary, right? These concepts all become necessary in order to have an understanding of human rights, right? So that you can't have an understanding of human rights without one of these ideas present, right? But one of these ideas present by itself isn't enough to have an understanding. It's sort of the collection of all of these concepts, right? So I would go so far, even as I take it a step further, just myself, I would take it a step further and say that the idea of human rights isn't just a product of historical development, right? Though we know that it is scientific enlightenment, the rise and fall of Nazi Germany, but that the idea of human rights also evolves. It would actually be interesting. This is something more that I would do sort of philosophically, but the idea of human rights evolves out of an attempt to, or a recognition of the interaction conceptually between a lot of these more fundamental concepts, right? When I have the idea of liberty in my mind, and I have the idea of equality in my mind, and I have the idea of freedom in my mind, and I have the idea of a right to life in my mind, all of these ideas, they give me a sense of not only me, right, in a sort of Cartesian sense. It not only gives me a sense of me, but I recognize, either rightly or wrongly, I recognize that insofar as this is something, these concepts define how I want to be recognized within the broader social nexus, then it must be the case that when I meet another person, they have the same rights. Now, I might not want to acknowledge that or recognize it, and conflict escalates at that point. But insofar as I have it, if I really believe in equality, how is it that they don't? Right? You can't say that you truly have these sort of not ancillary, but sort of foundational concepts met and satisfied, but then not recognize it in a fellow brother or sister, right? So, don't want to get too deep, but basically the idea is not only can we tie the developmental conception of human rights to its historical progression, we can also tie the developmental conception of human rights to a logical assessment of foundational concepts. In looking at just foundational concepts, you can deduce or infer the notion of human rights from a variety of ideas, right? So that if it didn't naturally serve as a, or sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like bubble to the surface. If it didn't develop, I guess, I can't think of the word, there's a better word. If it didn't naturally, I guess, come to fruition, if human rights didn't come to fruition on its own account, it would have, historically, it definitely would have come into fruition from a logical assessment of the foundational concepts, just strictly logically come to existence, which for me is actually more profound. But the discourse doesn't get into that, right, at all. Okay, so enough of that. That's Article 3. Next, and well, the last that I'm going to discuss in this sort of conception, this beginning account, is Article number 7, and it says, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection under the law. Right? All are equal before the law and are entitled without discrimination to equal protection of the law. Right? This entitlement, this is what's the key term in there, right? Entitlement. I think it's entitled, right? This is going to be problematic later, right? This idea of entitlement will be problematic, specifically for those who argue against rights, right? People believe that the idea of rights is, not many, but there are scholars, and I'm not going to get into it, that believe that the idea of rights is wholly, not just natural rights, right? But rights as such, all rights, it's wholly fabricated. There is no essence to rights, and rights are constructs that are used as a tool of manipulation. You think you have a right to freedom, you have a right to liberty, you have a right to whatever, and then those in power, on a whim, rob you of your entitlements. What do I mean by that? Well, look at the internment of Japanese Americans during the World War, right? There is a growing fear of Nazi Germany and Japanese conspiracy, fifth column infiltration